Helldivers 2 launched to incredible excitement, and now, a year later, it's been an absolutely insane ride to watch. The first year had its share of highs and lows, from explosive player numbers to some serious controversies, so where's the game at now? Let's see where Helldivers 2 is at 365 days later. When Helldivers 2 dropped, it was a sight to behold in the gaming community. Fans of the original Helldivers were looking forward to more of the chaotic team-based action that made the first game so good, and despite a relatively huge overhaul in the way Helldivers plays, slipping into a whole new gameplay genre, it was a huge success. The first 2 weeks were pure chaos. The player base exploded to a massive 450,000 people, which, of course, led to the servers absolutely crumbling under the pressure. Long queue times were inescapable, and a lot of people found themselves staring at loading screens rather than jumping into the action. For some, it was frustrating, but for many, the excitement of being able to be a part of Helldivers 2's launch was enough to stay in line. Once people actually got into the game, it was pretty clear that the core gameplay was worth the wait. Tight controls, tactical combat, and all the tactical missile calling friendly fire chaos that anyone could ever want. However, the learning curve was pretty brutal. Newcomers found themselves overwhelmed, especially towards the end of the game when things started to get tough. It wasn't just a simple point-and-shoot game. The team coordination required made Helldivers 2 as much about strategy as it was about action. Even with all of the launch headaches, the game found a flow that worked for it. The excitement didn't last forever, but the core players kept showing up, and the devs quickly got to work fixing bugs, boosting server caps, and adding new content, so even if launch wasn't flawless, it had a solid foundation that would set the tone for the coming year. As the months passed, Helldivers 2 got a steady stream of updates, 47 to be exact. Only 2 of those were major content updates. The first big update was Escalation of Freedom in August. This brought new mission objectives, new enemies, a new map, and a brand new ultra-hard difficulty. The second major update, Omens of Tyranny, took things even further, adding an entirely new faction to the game, the Illuminate. These 2 updates really helped fill out the experience and gave players more to chew on, which was a big deal considering the early complaints about a lack of content post-launch. Then there were the War Bonds. These were smaller updates that offered new challenges and rewards, essentially this game's version of battle passes, with the key difference being war bonds never go away. Despite a huge amount of success, it's important to remember the controversies that plagued the first year. First, there was a PSN requirement update that threatened to lock out players from 170 countries. This would have meant a massive chunk of the global gaming community would have been locked out, and though they've gone back on that decision, it hasn't been relisted in all of the countries that it was delisted on. But gamers were vocal, immediately weaponizing their Steam reviews to send a clear message. Overnight, the game went from overwhelmingly positive to overwhelmingly negative, and Sony did exactly the right thing by reversing the decision. The result? A satisfied customer base and one of the best in-game cosmetics I have ever seen. Then, just a few months back, the Helldivers 2 X Killzone crossover happened, and it didn't really go over well. The in-game items were priced pretty high, and the window to buy them was super short. The community definitely wasn't happy about it, but to their credit, Arrowhead responded by giving away the second wave of crossover items for free and extended the buying window by 5 extra days, essentially doubling the amount of time the items were available. Now, a year after launch, Helldivers 2 has definitely settled into a rhythm. While the initial excitement led to a peak of 450,000 players on Steam in those first few weeks, it's not surprising that that number has dropped off. That's just the reality of games. Launch numbers are always the highest, and they typically fade away as time goes on. Right now, about 60,000 players are still jumping into the game daily on Steam, which is actually pretty solid when you consider how many games have seen their numbers drop much lower. Look at games like Baldur's Gate 3, for example. It had a huge launch with player numbers almost double Helldivers 2's peak. But now, it's hanging around the same daily numbers as Helldivers 2. This drop-off is totally normal and not something to be worried about. In fact, Helldivers 2 has found a core audience of dedicated players that are still enjoying this game every single day, and that's something that should be celebrated. In terms of the team behind the game, the development team stayed relatively small. Pilstedt, the director of Helldivers 2, talked about the company's hiring process in relation to the wider gaming industry. When games get huge like this, studios will often overhire in an attempt to keep up with the demand for the game. Then, when it inevitably slows down, mass layoffs happen. In a climate where games industry layoffs are growing year by year, reaching 14,600 last year alone, Pilstedt wanted to avoid being part of the problem, and by keeping his team relatively small, it's remained entirely sustainable now that the game has slowed down. Pilstedt stepped down from his role as CEO of Arrowhead to focus solely on the game just a few months into its launch. Shams Jorjani took over as CEO, and he's done a phenomenal job running the show. And as for Pilstedt, a few weeks ago he announced he's taking a well-deserved sabbatical after a pretty intense year of running things with Helldivers. So where does Helldivers 2 stand now? Honestly, it's in a really good place. The first year was a monumental success, and despite a few controversies, the game has weathered it all. The player base has settled into something sustainable, the updates keep rolling in, and the devs have proven that they're committed to making the game better, and once Pilstead returns, work on the next Arrowhead game will begin. If you haven't jumped in yet, there's a lot to look forward to, and if you've been playing since launch, it's only getting better from here. Thank you for watching Game Rant. I'm Cameron. We'll see you next time.